sleeve of Treasury called TFI, Terrorism Finance, that deals with this within FinCEN, and I believe that I believe that we have to have a 2025 approach to, as you and I talked about, digital currencies and all branches of government. So, yes.
Now, Mr. Bissett, in your role as Treasury Secretary, do you agree that you will play an important role in advising President Trump and congressional Republicans on policy related to the economy, including investment in government programs?
Yes, Senator.
Now, I was pleased in our meeting that you stated, quote, "No cuts will be needed," unquote, to achieve your economic goals. I think that might surprise a lot of my Republican colleagues, but I very much appreciate that conversation that we had. Now, yes or no, will you recommend cutting Medicaid?
I'm sorry. Did you say, I didn't hear whether you said Medicaid or Medicare.
Yes. Will you recommend cutting Medicaid?
Medicaid? I will, it's for some states that will be an increase, for some states that will be a decrease.
So, Mr. Bissett, will you recommend cutting Medicaid to President Trump? And I'll remind you that you acknowledge that one of your responsibilities as Secretary of the Treasury will be to be providing this advice.
I will get back to you on this when I have seen the details of the full budget proposal once President Trump is in office and if confirmed.
Will you recommend cuts to broadband following the investments that we've been seeing across the country, making immense progress in connecting more people across the country that were included in the bipartisan infrastructure law?
Senator, I am unfamiliar with the exact program. It is my understanding of the allocated funding has not been dispersed yet. So I will get back to you on that.
Well, Mr. Bissett, a lot of folks back in South Carolina, including some of your farming neighbors, are getting connectivity because of these programs. It might surprise many here that there's only a couple of us in this body that are members of Head Start, and I imagine we might hear a little bit more of that from my brother in Head Start, Mr. Warnock here. But when we talk about the importance to early education in America, the economic benefit, yes or no, will you recommend cuts to Head Start?
Yeah. Again, Senator, I'll have to get back to you on this. I don't understand the intricacies of that program.
Of Head Start?
Yes, I don't understand the budget ramifications. I don't understand.
Do you know what Head Start is?
Yep, I believe it's an earlier childhood education program.
That's fair, sir. I didn't realize that you have to qualify to get into that program. So the family that I was raised in, we qualified to get into that program. But it opens up doors. I mean, heck, it got a couple of us to the United States Senate. So certainly hope that we might be able to find some agreement in protecting that program. And if someone tries to eliminate that in early childhood education, that we could count on you on behalf of New Mexicans, South Carolinians, and people across America to say, no, we're not going to do that one. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time today. Appreciate you being here again, sir.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for your willingness to serve. Thanks for being here. Enjoyed our discussion quite a bit in talking about the future for the country and the role of the Treasury Secretary in getting our economy back on track. This means lower prices, higher wages, more jobs, and stronger economic growth for America. It also means protecting people in states like Wyoming from crushing regulations and devastating tax hikes. It means getting wasteful spending under control. And I'm greatly encouraged by our meeting that we had. You have, I believe, a strong vision for America, a strong vision for unleashing American energy, for getting tough on China, for getting tough on our adversaries, and to getting the federal government out of the way for so many of us. I'd like to talk a bit about energy, and I've just been in the other committee yesterday, Secretary of Energy, earlier today, the Secretary of Interior, lots of energy questions. So I'm glad that we agree a key ingredient in reigniting the economy in this country is to unleash American energy. In my home state of Wyoming, and we're an energy superpower as a nation, and we are America's energy breadbasket in Wyoming. Energy production is the heart of our Wyoming economy and the nation's economy. It supports workers as well as schools, infrastructure, the money that comes from that, the tax revenue. Wyoming is the least populated state, but it is the third largest net energy supplier, producing 12 times more energy than we consume. It's at the forefront of oil, natural gas, coal production, carbon capture technology, hydrogen production, many alternative sources of energy. What's happened is that energy producers in Wyoming and across the country faced a whole of government assault from the Biden administration on American energy production, taxes, crippling regulations. They've weaponized the tax code in ways that are just unthinkable to me against conventional American energy production. The things that Joe Biden signed into law just made things worse. But the good news is with you there, with President Trump in the White House, things are about to change. So you've talked extensively about boosting American energy production. What role do you see yourself playing as American energy dominant and in terms of energy security as well?
Senator Barrasso, I very much enjoyed our meeting and wide-ranging discussion, and my family and I had a fantastic vacation in Wyoming this summer. That in terms of within the potential Trump administration, I'm sure you've heard it from Secretary-designate Wright and Burgum, we refer to as energy dominance. And energy dominance, one of the reasons that I believe we have not been able to apply as muscular sanctions against the Russian Federation, or unwilling, was because the supply of energy was constrained in the U.S. So the same with the terrorist regime in Iran. So I would view that as we can raise U.S. production, we would squeeze down the bad actors, especially Iran. I think I'm right, maybe not in the exact numbers, but in order of magnitude. I believe Iran was down to 100,000 barrels of oil exports when President Trump left office. I believe that they are now exporting in excess, or approximately 1.7 million. So through sanctions policy, I believe that we can, again, as I like to say, make Iran poor again. Not the Iranian people, the government, and then at the same time, have our domestic producers push that up with the highest energy standards in the world.
Yeah, we're the best. We do it. We're the best stewards of the land, and I agree. And what we've also seen, as you mentioned, with Iran increasing the sales, they're selling it to China. China is buying at a discount, so they're getting cheap energy. Iran is getting tanker loads of cash back, essentially, and they're using that money for terrorism. So in terms of our own national security, I have one last question in my time remaining, and this has to do with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that we passed in 2017. If that were to expire, we're talking about a massive tax hike of over $4 trillion. What would that kind of a tax hike mean for small businesses, for job creators, as well as our global competitiveness, if all of a sudden we put the heavy wet blanket of a $4 trillion tax increase on our nation?
Senator, I think it would be devastating. That is, especially for small businesses. One of the things that, as someone who came from a very small town, lived in New York, with a very big town, and came back to a small town, I believe Wall Street has done great the past few years, and that Main Street has suffered. I think it's Main Street's time. Wall Street can continue to do well, maybe not as well, and it's time to have a Main Street small business-led recovery led by small banks, regional banks, as I call it, reprivatizing the economy. And as I said earlier, we've seen since November 15th, since President Trump's election, we have seen the biggest jump in the history of the Small Business Confidence Index.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bisson, thank you for being here and time in the office, and congratulations to you. And when you were being attacked on by one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, it says the guy looks like he's got a heart rate of 40. You're very composed, and thank you for staying on the facts and demonstrating all the knowledge you possess. When I wasn't here, someone put into question your viability as a nominee because of a lack of public service, which I find interesting. Sometimes I think we have too much public service in people's background here, not real-world business experience. But can you give me an idea of why this nomination may represent your first entry into public service?
Yes, Senator Tillis. And again, as an adjacent state and someone who's a homeowner in North Carolina, I appreciated our conversation in your office. Look, I have been in public service, just not in the government. When I lived in New York, I was a strong supporter of a charter school called Harlem Children's Zone, which takes the young residents in a multi-block, gigantic block, keeps getting bigger area of Harlem, and takes them from cradle through high school. But I have found that my service, anyone can write a check, or anyone that with my means can write a check. What has been fulfilling for me is mentoring many of these young people. I'm still in touch with them today. I was also a trustee for Rockefeller University, one of the great research universities in the world. I was on the executive committee and chaired the investment committee. But sitting here today is especially meaningful for me because this is my third try at public service. In 1979, when I was 17 years old, I wanted to fight for my country. My father had just experienced extreme financial difficulties. I wanted to attend the U.S. Naval Academy. I was offered by our congressman in the 6th District of South Carolina an appointment, but was unable to take that appointment because of my sexual preference. I managed to go to Yale, worked several jobs to do that. While at Yale, I wanted to do public service and joined the Foreign Service. I was told also not welcome. So sitting here today is my third attempt at public service, and I sit here knowing that President Trump chose me because he believes I'm the best candidate, not because of my sexual preference, not because Treasury secretaries with green eyes do better, and that he looks at people as people.
I agree, and I appreciate that answer. I'm going to go into a lightning round here. First off, this is the Joint Committee on Taxation distributional analysis of what happens to the various socioeconomic strata if we don't manage to pass the jobs and tax cut extension without exception.
Without objection.
Senator Johnson does big phone boards. I do handouts. I'm handing this to all of my Republican colleagues right now saying if we fail to extend the Jobs and Tax Cuts Act, we're going to own a fiscal crisis for people in middle America. 93 million people will be affected in terms of an added tax burden if we fail to pass an extension of TCJA. Now, the last time I checked, there are not 93 million rich people in this country. There are people who struggled like you did when you were a kid and like I did when I was a kid, who had to work themselves through college. And every time we had some well-intentioned program from government to make things better for me, it made it harder for me to dig myself out of the economic situation I was born into. So the facts are stubborn things. This tells us what happens if we fail to pass the jobs and tax cuts. And it doesn't even get to the impact that I had. It turns out at that very table, Jelly Roll was here for a finance committee hearing. He lived in the same trailer park that I did 20 years later in South Nashville, Tennessee. And what I found interesting in my own family is we were right on the economic edge. Every time government had some well-intentioned program to tax the rich, I went from a house to a trailer park. And every time government let us do what we wanted to do, we lived in a house. I'm a living example, and I'm sure Ben Ray Lujan, some other people have had those experiences. You got to go back and look historically at when people like me and people like you had real opportunities. I look forward to supporting your nomination, and Mr. Chair, I'm going to support some. I'm going to send some questions for the record, but it's just to reinforce the message that Republicans have to deliver. And anyone who says that we should not is advocating for a $5 trillion tax increase that will hurt the people who are on the economic edge worse than anybody else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Warnock.
Thank you, Chairman Crapo. I'm grateful and honored to be joining this committee. I look forward to working with you and Ranking Member Wyden to ensure our tax code supports working families, to protect Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and to promote trade policies that work for Georgia businesses and that boost our economy. Mr. Bessent, good morning and good to see you again. I enjoyed our conversation earlier this week, and in that conversation you outlined ambitious goals for the federal government and deficit reduction. I'd like to follow up on our discussion about your economic plan. According to a new report from the Tax Policy Center, the largest tax cuts from extending the Trump tax bill would go to those with the highest income, especially those in the top 1%, making more than $1 million per year. In fact, the top 1% of owners will take home roughly 1/4 of the benefits of the law, and the top 5% will get almost half of that. Do you believe that the wealthiest 1% of Americans deserve or need an additional tax cut?
Senator Warnock, I greatly enjoyed visiting with you. I think probably a better way to look at it is on a percentage basis. And when I think about the distributional aspects of the Tax Cuts and Job Act, that most of the benefits accrued for the working and middle people as opposed to the upper ends. In absolute dollars, as you just read, that is correct, but I think it's important to look at it in percentage terms.
So you believe that the tax cut that provided 1/4 of the benefits of the law to the top 1% and top 5% getting almost 1/2 actually benefited those at the bottom more than it did those at the top. Is that your testimony?
I believe that in 2018, 2019, that the households in the bottom 50% of income earners, the wealth increase for those households was three times higher than the wealth increase for the top 10% of Americans.
So we should continue to move in that direction and give more tax cuts to those at the highest. You have talked about high deficits as a national defense problem, and I agree with that. I think we need to be fiscally responsible. We need to work to close the deficit and bring the national debt under control. In 2030, this bipartisan decision saved the Treasury $600 billion, helping to narrow the deficit. Do you agree that ending the tax cuts for those making more than $400,000 would help close the deficit and reduce our national debt?
Senator Warnock, I do not. I believe that you would capture an inordinate amount of small business people who largely are in that cohort of 400,000 to $1 million.
So you wouldn't cut it off at 400,000. What about $1 million?
That, again, I believe these are small business pass-through owners, and I believe that we, as I said before, Wall Street's done great. It is time for Main Street to do well, and small businesses need to drive what I call the reprivatization here away from this government spending.
I agree that it's Main Street's time. I'm from Atlanta, so I'll say Peachtree and some other locations in my state. What about those making more than $10 million? Would we reduce the deficit by extending those tax cuts for folks making about $10 million?
So again, I think it's important that we put in incentives for them to invest So going back to the 100% depreciation for equipment, that I think that.
And I don't mean to keep interrupting, but I'm the pastor, and we're known to be loquacious of speech, but I'm running out of time here. What about $1 billion?
So again, that I think that these are the job creators.
So there's no income level for which you would support raising taxes. Is that fair?
There is no income level that I don't think we should continue the TCJA as it was.
All right. I think our country is facing structural deficits. However, I think that to continue to reduce taxes for the wealthy and letting them avoid taxes based on what they already owe is not going to get us out of that problem. But I look forward to continuing that discussion with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you today. I'll just restate one that I said in my opening statement, and that is of this $4.3 to $4.6 trillion tax increase that it could happen, $100,000. That is simple tax increase. Senator Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing that clarification, because if we do not extend the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, it is that $4 trillion tax hike that people are going to see. And I appreciate your comments about a Main Street small business recovery. That is something that is so vitally important. And as the chairman knows, we have had much discussion over the last few years with the Biden administration over how they determine that $400,000 number. If it is the gross, if it's the adjusted gross, they came up with the term of total positive income, which is everything you make. And we know that the Biden administration approach on this would be a killer for Main Street businesses. We know that 199A is vital to them, and they need to see that in the Trump tax cuts and in that permanent, so that we can have that Main Street small business recovery and revival. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that President Trump has nominated you for Treasury Secretary, because you are sensitive to that and what your work means to Main Street and to individuals, and getting the IRS under control and looking at some of these provisions that are going to be in front of you. So we appreciate that you would come back a third time and look at public service, and that John and Caroline and Colin, by the way, they are behaving so beautifully. Whatever they want, they get.
Ice cream.
Senate orders. We'll be right there to support them. I do want to talk with you for a moment about CBDCs and some of the push that the Biden administration had. They did an executive order for Treasury to research development of a CBDC in the United States. And of course, this causes a lot of us heartburn, because we look at what the CCP did with the digital yuan in connection with the Olympics. So upon confirmation, how would you approach this discussion of CBDCs? And are you for them or against them? Could you end the Biden administration project to create a U.S.-based CBDC?
Senator Blackburn, thank you for your remarks. I may have a little trouble disciplining the two behind me, as I'm sure that I will hear that a U.S. Senator has vouched for their behavior.
Yes.
But on my mind, a central bank digital currency is for countries who have no other investment alternatives. So if we think about a reserve manager, a high surplus country, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Singapore, who ends up with, call the Chinese currency whatever you want, the yuan, the RMB.
Yeah.
If you own that currency, you have to have something to invest in. That there's very little to invest in if you want to hold the currency. You could own Chinese government bonds, which don't yield
So
very
your
much.
view of that would be a negative view?
Well, I view that many of these countries are doing it out of necessity, whereas
Yeah.
the U.S., if you hold U.S. dollars, you could hold a variety of
Absolutely.
very secure U.S.
Yeah.
assets.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your comments earlier to Senator Barrasso about the Pillar 2 negotiations. This is something that we would be well served to extract ourselves from this. Currently, the preliminary data that we have, 40%, right at 40% of the total Pillar 2 tax burden is on us. And China, of course, has found a way to exempt themselves from this. So that is in need of a revisit, and I look forward to you doing that and standing with our companies. I want to get, and this I think you can just submit to me in writing, Advanced Persistent Threat, APT, which is China. They were able to override Treasury's security system and remotely access workstations where they reported access to unclassified documents. And of course, this is Chinese Communist Party at work again. And this is, we found this out after finding out from the Treasury Inspector General that 2,800 IRS employees still had TikTok on their government devices. If confirmed, and when confirmed, will you take steps to improve Treasury's security systems?
Senator Blackburn, one of the earlier questions was, what policies of the current Treasury Secretary do you disagree with? And as you noted, the December 8th hack into Treasury was via a work-from-home system. Yeah. So I, as Treasury Secretary, have confirmed, plan to be in the office every day that I'm in Washington, D.C., and I expect all the other employees to do that too.
Thank you.
And I think it's a matter of when to be at 1500 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is well received. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Welch.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's delightful to be a new member of the committee. I look forward to working with you and all our colleagues. Mr. Besson, thank you so much for your visit yesterday, and welcome to your family. As we discussed, the situation for a lot of Vermonters who work incredibly hard is very tough. Vermont actually has one of the widest, if not the widest, gap between what people can earn and what their expenses are. So it's tough at the end of the month to pay all the bills, the grocery bills, the health care bills, all of these things. And we're talking, in a way, abstractly about this tax plan. And the reality for most folks in this country is that for the past 40 years, working Americans have actually had a pay cut, not a pay increase. And my hope is that whatever tax policy we have is going to start commitment to making lives better for the Main Street folks that you mentioned, and I'm glad that you did. But there is going to be a lot of negotiation on how to pay for these tax cuts. And one of the things that will be on the block is something that's very, very important to Vermonters, and that's the affordable tax care credits that we have now. So in Vermont, I mean, health care is incredibly expensive for everybody. But if we have, just as an example, an electrician in Bennington, Vermont, who's making $67,000 a year, with the tax credits that are set to expire, that family would have a $700 a month increase in their health care bill. That's going to hammer them. It's like $9,000. So my question to you is, in putting together this tax proposal, where you are going to have to be making recommendations about how to pay for it, will we continue to provide this help to Vermonters, like this electrician in Brattleboro, so that he doesn't get hammered on health care premiums going well beyond what he can afford?
Senator, as we discussed in your office, and I haven't had time to do my homework on this, as I think I told you that my family, friends, business colleagues, I often get sick of hearing my phrase, no data, no opinion.
No,
I will get up to speed. If confirmed, I will get up to this.
I appreciate that, but there's a couple of things that really make a difference for working Americans in South Carolina and in Vermont. The child tax credit, when we had that, it reduced poverty for children by 50%. That's really elemental is just a brutal expense for employers too, by the way. So my hope is that in the design, we're going to start by making certain that we do no harm to working Vermonters and working South Carolinians, okay? Second, on the tariffs, I'm in support of the China tariffs. That is defending us against unfair trade practices by China. I'm concerned about the impact of tariffs on Canada and what that does to us in Vermont. Our major business partner, export partner, is Canada. And from what we have seen, it would raise the cost to businesses, probably cost jobs and cost to consumers. So what reassurance can we get from the Trump administration that there's going to be a do no harm policy to American consumers and Vermont workers and small businesses with a tariff policy?
Senator, very, very difficult for me to isolate Vermont, especially. But in terms of working Americans, I believe that President Trump understands that it's working America. He had a very unique coalition.
Well, he does. And my hope to appreciate the opportunity to work with you on that.
I look forward to working with you. And look, I think he understands that it's the affordability crisis.
It is. And just the last thing, very little time, but we were talking about credit card rates for consumers. Credit card fees for our small businesses are the highest in the whole world, the highest in the whole world. Why can't we bring them down and pay what Europe pays? Our small businesses, it's like the second or third highest expense for them. And you'll have some impact there. But those costs on our small business, including those small, the pass-through businesses, I'd like to get them down and get your help in doing that.
I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Senator Marshall.
Well, thank you, Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Wyden. It's great to join the Finance Committee. As I listen around, it seems to me like so many of us share the same goal, that we want Americans to be prosperous. We want them to be able to live their American dream. We disagree how to get there oftentimes, but we all had this same goal, that we want Americans to be prosperous. Mr. Bessent, welcome, and congratulations on your nomination as well. I think it could be said that rural America in many ways is President Trump's base. Of the 77 million people that voted for President Trump, a lot of them came from rural America. In fact, I think I could argue that 90% of rural Americans voted for President Trump. And no one has suffered more these last 4 years than rural America has. So my questions may be geared up about that as this economy. What can we do to help Main Street, to help small businesses, and to help rural America? Now, everyone knows that you're a financial wizard, that you've been successful on Wall Street. But I just want to understand your commitment to small town America. You're from a small town. I think you understand agriculture from our conversations, and even some background in community banks. How important are community banks to those small towns, and what is your commitment to rural America?
Well, Senator Marshall, I think again, may be one of the few Treasury Secretary nominees in recent period who occasionally listens to farm radio and I can tell you that after the Silicon Valley debacle, that farm radio was intensely focused on the potential loss of small and community banks.
Yes.
And they are important pillars for those communities. So I think examining in terms of what is the regulation, what is the supervision, that are they being unduly burdened, and that they are not able to help their communities. What are the supervisor, what is the supervisory edict there? And then again, as I said earlier too, I think that China has not made good on their ag purchases for 4 years. And if confirmed, next week, I would start pushing for them to resume the purchases, and then I would conference with President Trump on whether he believes that there should be a makeup provision.
Thank you. I want to stay on rural America and talk about tax credits for a second. 45Z is a tax credit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not, but it would really help rural America in the standpoint that we help take some of our feedstocks, whether it's soybeans or corn, and turn it into biodiesel, renewable diesel. I think it's going to lead to a cleaner air for all of us, but it's certainly very important to rural America, and just would ask that you would look into it. But what we can't do is let China benefit from it. I really think any tax credit we have should not impact foreign entities, and just want to get a few background thoughts on this 45Z tax credit from you.
Well, as we discussed in your office, and you gave me a very good overview of how the Chinese backdoor into this program. So that's obviously unacceptable. And I look forward to working with you on the 45Z.
Great. And then I want to finish up probably here on the Trump tax cuts and how important it is to make them permanent. I don't understand what $4.6 trillion is, but I can tell you that families back in Kansas were able to keep about $1,000 a month in their pocket after the Trump assumed that those same families would be giving the federal government another $1,000. So this issue to me is vitally important to rural America to the tune of $1,000 a month. So I guess my question for you is, beyond just making the current Trump tax cuts permanent, what else would be on the menu that would help the economy as far as other tax cuts?
Well, I think President Trump has talked about, and it's not specifically a rural issue, but it is something that affects the lower 2 quintiles of the income distribution more. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, and perhaps making auto loans tax deductible again. That would go a long way towards addressing this affordability crisis.
So it's a great start. I hope we can come back and talk about C-Corp tax coming down as well one more time. That is permanent as it is, but I think there's opportunity there. Thank you, Chairman. It's an honor to be here.
Mr. Chairman, one sentence. I very much appreciate our colleague mentioning 45Z, the Clean Fuels Production Tax Credit. That is part of the clean energy tax credits that we got into law. So I look forward to working with you on it.
Thank you. So let me just, Mr. Bessent, so you understand how we're going here. I know it's been a long time, and thank you for your patience. We have Senator Warren next, followed by Senator Scott. And Senator Wyden would like to ask one more question. He gets the only extra question of the day. And then he and I will probably make a few very brief remarks in wrap up, and we'll be finished at that point. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Bessent, and welcome to your family. It's good to see everyone here today. So last month, President Trump said he supports repealing the debt limit. So do I. So there we are. Donald Trump and Elizabeth Warren are singing from the same hymnal. Mr. Bessent, let's make it a trio. Do you agree with President-elect Trump that the debt limit should be repealed?
Senator Warren, first of all, I enjoyed our visit in your office and appreciate the fact that when I walked in, you said, let's talk about what we have in common, our love of Cape Cod, the Red Sox, and that addressing the affordability crisis and the housing shortage. So the debt limit is a very nuanced convention. What I would like to do is get back to you and President Trump, I'd like to do a survey of market participants with this amount of debt. It's very fragile equilibrium that we sell bonds in.
Mr. Besson, forgive me for just a minute here, because this is the question about I'm not asking you whether or not we ought to increase our debt. I'm asking a very different question, and that is whether or not we should have a statute in place that says there's a debt limit that, if we don't increase the debt limit, would cause us to default. And that's not an economic analysis. In fact, let me ask you, I understand earlier you were citing the Congressional Budget Office. Have you seen the Congressional Budget Office projections of what would happen if the United States government defaulted on its debt? That is, if we hit the debt limit and just kept on going without raising it or eliminating it?
Yeah, look, Senator Warren, the United States is not going to default on its debt if I'm confirmed. But I will tell you that for people who don't understand the debt limit, it might be like taking out your handbrake in your car, that you can still hit the brakes, but it's one less feature.
But I thought you just said you'd never use it. So you're talking about a handbrake that appears to be there, but in fact is not connected to a braking system. It is literally never used, right?
I've never pulled a handbrake going 60 miles an hour in my car.
And the reason for that, I assume, is the enormous cost of a debt default. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office that I was asking you about a minute ago said dollars and cost 6 million people their jobs. I think this is the reason that President-elect Trump said that eliminating the debt limit is, quote, the smartest thing Congress could do. And I'd like for Congress to do the smartest thing, and that is eliminate the debt limit so we don't have this problem.
Well, Senator Warren, I will tell you that once President Trump takes office, and if I'm confirmed, if he wants to eliminate the debt limit, I will work with him and you on that.
Great, great, because I agree with President-elect Trump that the debt limit should be repealed. I note, however, right now that's not what congressional Republicans plan to do. Last month, they committed to raising the debt limit by another $1.5 trillion. So why do Republicans want to raise the debt ceiling? Because their plan is to shovel new tax cuts to billionaires, and that would increase the debt by more than $1 trillion just in the next 4-year period. During his first term, President Trump's only major legislative achievement was his 2017 tax cuts that mostly got sucked up by millionaires, billionaires, and giant corporations. Now, most of these cuts were good for only 8 years, so that Republicans who were designing them could claim that the cost was only $2 trillion, 8 years of cuts that added $2 trillion to the debt. Now we're talking about Republicans and President-elect Trump who want to give those same rich people and giant corporations more years of tax cuts. And I just want to be clear that we understand each other here, that I think it was Senator Warnock who asked you about, is there any billionaire rich enough who you wouldn't support a tax cut for going forward?
That I think it's unwise to single out any
rich people?
Any individual.
Okay, is there any group of billionaires? You can just pick a dollar figure and there can be more than one above that.
I could give you a glib answer, but I won't. But again, that's not where the money is. At one point when President Obama was debating Mitt Romney, the moderator said, "But sir, that would make collections go down." And he said, "Yeah, but it's about fairness." And I have to tell you, Senator Warren, I'm about collection.
I understand, but I like to think that fairness is about billionaires actually paying their fair share too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, welcome, or Mr. Besson, welcome to our committee, and good to see you again, and thank you for your willingness to serve. It is certainly a sacrifice to you and your family, but I think it's actually an investment for the country. We need folks who are willing to sacrifice on behalf of a greater cause. The greater cause in this instance is generations of Americans you will likely never meet, but we'll be better off because we do the right thing. One of the things I think about as the right thing, I know you grew up in a working class family, and I grew up in a single parent household mired in poverty, is having Silicon Valley Bank and other banks that failed recently. And as you can imagine, as the chairman of the banking committee, I care deeply about the stability and strength of our banking system. From your vantage point, can you provide your assessment of the current safety and soundness of the U.S. banking industry, and what steps you believe are necessary to ensure long-term stability?
Senator Scott, good to see you. Good to have two South Carolinians in the room. And look, I think the strength of the U.S. Economy, our financial markets, is the depth and breadth of our financial systems. I believe that we have likely seen the top 5 banks become too big a share of banking assets. We have seen, because of undue regulation, the shadow banking system get larger and larger, and to the detriment of community banks, small banks, and the small regional banks. So I think that we have to take a look at both regulatory and supervisory conditions in those. I think that the banking system is well capitalized, perhaps over-capitalized, and this comes from someone, my background is as a financial institutions analyst. I've also taught the history of financial crises, so I am very attuned to the idea that financial stability is important. The pendulum tends to swing from one way, go into overshoot, and that from 99 to 2008, that was an overshoot. And since then, the regulation, our banking system has been constrained. And if we are going to have the kind of the generalized Main Street prosperity that I would like to see over the next few years, it's going to be driven by communities, small banks, and small regionals.
Well, if I had more time, maybe another 5 or 6 minutes would be great. I don't think I'm getting it. Thank you very much. We'd spend a little more time on Basel III because your answer actually reinforces the fact that Basel III puts more capital on the sidelines, which means there's less capital to loan for mortgages or for starting small businesses. But I won't go there. But where I will go, however, is towards opportunity zones. As you know, I wrote the legislation, and opportunity zones was in fact a bipartisan piece of legislation, although it's only supported by mayors, Democrat mayors support it and celebrate it. My friends who are Republican governors support it and celebrate it, because the fact is simple, that $84 billion committed and invested in opportunity zones have led to real help coming into some distressed communities. It's only had less than a 5% gentrification. For the housing question, so many folks, mayors around the country, said for the first time, because of opportunity zones, they're seeing affordable housing in their downtown areas, and they haven't seen it, John Geddes in Rock Hill, 3 decades. So we know that they've been effective without gentrification. I hope that the administration will spend some time encouraging and supporting the next iteration of opportunity zones. Your thoughts quickly?
Senator Scott, I think they have been a resounding success. And I recently read data that in terms of affordable housing, the opportunity zones have created more affordable housing within the zones than any other federal government program since opportunity zones were created. So I think that it's a fantastic way to address the housing crisis. I think the inner city redevelopment, I think we could think about opportunity zones more in rural areas.
Yes.
So I look.
Last thoughts will be a comment, not a question. But as a result of the TCJA, we saw the richest Americans' tax burden as a percent of revenues coming in go up. And we saw the poorest Americans as a percent of revenue coming into the government go down. I think the easiest way to say that is to recognize that a single mother like the one who raised me in 2017 made on average $40,000 a year, her tax burden, her tax percent went down, her tax rate went down by 71%. That is a result of good policy being good politics, and I hope we keep our eye on the ball of helping the average American have more of their money in their pockets. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Besson. Thank you for the meeting we had in my office. I understand that colleagues have already raised the urgency of more sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet, particularly as it is sabotaging our allies' infrastructure in the Baltic, and urged that it is unfair for Chinese manufacturers to be able to underprice U.S. manufacturers by virtue of lower environmental standards. So I just want to give two big thumbs ups to both of those notions. As we talked about in my office, I think that the most immediate danger of a major economic collapse is going to come through the insurance industry. We're seeing signs of it in Florida already. The fires in LA are making it worse out in California, but it's occurring nationwide. And as we discussed, where you can't get insurance, you can't get mortgages, where you can't get mortgages, you can't sell properties at value, and that cascades, according to the chief economist of Freddie Mac, into a... So I would like to ask first that you get somebody on your team to take a look at this report, which I'd ask to put into the record, from the Senate Budget Committee while I was chairing it, on the non-renewals, price increases, and unavailability problem county by county across the country. And if somebody on your team looks at it and can give you a summary, I would be grateful. And I would actually ask you personally to read this Economist magazine article. I don't think it's complicated.
No, Senator Whitehouse, you gave it to me in your office, and I did read it.
Good.
So
all right, so we're ahead of you. So I just want to make sure.
I will point out to my children behind me, doing your homework's important.
It is important, and thank you for doing that. I think you're the first person in a nominations hearing who's actually done the reading that has been proposed. So I just think that all of us need to be alert to this problem. I think it's actually started. Ernest Hemingway famously said that bankruptcies happen gradually and then suddenly. I think we're in gradually on a climate change driven insurance crisis that will cascade out into the whole economy. I gave my Environment Public Works colleagues a book this thick. I gave your team a similar book of all the many high-level, serious, peer-reviewed studies that have shown these economic risks. And I just don't think we're ready for it. And I think it's really important that we be ready for it. And I don't want anybody to say that they weren't warned about it. So there's my warning. Last question to you, and I'm going to be treading into an area where I don't know a thing because I just heard about this morning, and I've been the ranking member in the EPW noms hearing. So what I did read this morning is that the manner in which you have structured your partnership has enabled you to avoid the payment of nearly $1 million in Medicare taxes, and that the IRS has taken the position that the manner in which you structured your partnership to avoid those Medicare taxes does not actually support avoiding Medicare taxes. And it's probably more complicated of an issue than you and I are going to get through in the next 1 minute and 13 seconds. So we'll follow up with a question for the record. But I just think that when we're dealing with these massive issues of income inequality and threats to Medicare and all of the concerns that I think actually helped propel President Trump to the presidency, it would be extremely awkward if the Secretary of the Treasury were taking advantage of a supposed avoidance mechanism that the IRS, which you oversee, has determined actually doesn't produce that result. And somehow those things need to come into alignment. I don't know why. I suppose the easiest thing would be to go back and pay the Medicare taxes. But again, this is way more complicated than you and I can dispose of in the next half minute. But I do think it's important. I think it's really important to send a message as an incoming Treasury Secretary that everything you do with respect to your personal taxes aligns with IRS guidance.
Senator White, thank you for the question. So it is the firm's taxes, and we are up to date on all our taxes. This matter is not by us, but it is in continuing litigation. If confirmed, I have agreed to shutter my firm, and I have also informed the ranking member and the chairman that I will provision the amount that is lower than the amount that was stated in the press release that went out last night, and I will hold that until till the case makes its way through the courts. So once
that seems like an attentive response to the problem, and I'm glad you respected this actually is a problem that needs to be attended to. So thank you.
Thank you. And Senator Wyden has asked if he could add one final question. You get the last one, Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I gather that after this, at some point, you and I will have some closers. I appreciate that, and I'm going to be very short on that as well. Mr. Besson, I want to ask about the double standard with respect to tax enforcement in America. The working person, a firefighter or a nurse or somebody who works for a wage, pays taxes with every single paycheck, and the government gets that information. And to a great extent, the ultra-wealthy can have a very different system. They can bring in this whole battery of accountants and lawyers and the like and say, you know, make sure that I don't have a lot of income this year. And then they don't have the same reporting system. And what I have always felt is that ensuring that the government, the IRS, can do tax enforcement to prevent wealthy tax cheating is absolutely crucial to limiting this double standard with respect to enforcement, where you have all this information from people who are working for a wage, and you're trying to figure out what's actually going on with lots of wealthy people. Because to me, the scam is in what's legal. I want it understood that I'm talking about people using their accountants and lawyers and this battery of people. So my question to you is, do you believe that it makes sense for the Congress to give the IRS the resources to collect taxes from people who may be cheating? And we don't even know because it's so hard to run down all this information. Do you believe it's important for the Congress to fund the IRS for that kind of enforcement?
Senator Wyden, I believe that collections are very important, and I believe that the IRS, and again, I haven't been confirmed, I have had no meetings, this is all external. I believe that a large amount of it can be solved by data processing, verge of an AI revolution, and I would hope that the AI revolution, much as it has in medical technology, it's pattern recognition, and that my understanding now is that the agency runs on 12 different systems on COBOL, which is the programming language that when I went to Yale in 1980. So I am 100% in favor of that, of updating those systems.
So you talked to me about this in the office, and I appreciated the comments. It's still resources. It's going to be computers, perhaps, not people. But I showed up in the United States Senate when only one person, Pat Leahy, knew how to use a computer. And so we've seen these dramatic developments, and I think you're right, AI is going to shape the debate, but it still leaves the question, we're going to need resources. And again, what you've seen, because we don't have the resources to go after the wealthy tax cheats, people who use the earned income tax credit or something, they're the ones, who get the audits and the like. And I I want to see in this position somebody make a commitment to making sure we'll have the resources to go after the wealthy tax cheats who have this unique kind of system. And I would acknowledge your point that certainly it's going to be a challenge in the years ahead with respect to AI and other technologies, but we're still going to need resources. Are you going to support that?
If confirmed, I will come back to you with a plan for upping collections.
On wealthy tax cheats?
Well, you seem to believe that the wealthy cheat more, but that I think across the entire income spectrum. So you were saying that the wealthy have this special cachet, and if there is some large mother lode there, then to figure out how to crack that, whether it's through AI or some other means, that I will commit to coming back to you.
Well, let me tell you why it's so important. Former IRS Commissioner Rettig, who was President-elect Trump's last IRS commissioner, testified here that the IRS needed additional multi-year funding because it was, quote, outgunned when it came to auditing wealthy individuals and large corporations. So the view that I have stated today is not just one that I offer, but a former Trump appointee said specifically that the agency was outgunned with respect to resources. So you've indicated that you'll continue the discussion. It's an important one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good.
Well, thank you. And why don't you go ahead with any closing remarks you'd like to make right now, and then I will wrap it up.
I'm going to spare everybody, and especially the nominee, a filibuster. It's been a long morning. And Mr. Bessent, we started off with your confirming that you're going to protect taxpayers' ability to file their taxes for free directly with the IRS. I think that's constructive because I think when it works for a second straight year, we're going to begin to join the rest of the Western industrialized world in making sure that our people have a chance to have a system that works for them, that empowers them if they choose it. With respect to some other issues, I'm concerned about a number of other matters, and we may need to have some additional conversations about it. What concerned me was your response to my question about wealth rather than work with respect to being favored in the tax code. And I think today that's a reality. That's just plain fact. And the people I represent know it because they pay taxes with all their paychecks, and they're paying a higher rate than people who, as I've indicated today, have good lawyers and good accountants. So I continue to be very troubled by that. And some of the past reforms have tried to minimize those differences between tax rates for wealthy people and tax rates for workers. But I remain concerned about that. And with respect to some of the other issues, I leave you with the proposition that I haven't really heard you touch on, and it's the proposition that Bill Bradley and I have believed in these many years, is we want a tax code that gives everybody in America the chance to get ahead. And with differences like the one I've asked about, the difference between the rates for the wealthy and for workers, there's a long way to go to get it done. So I'll look forward to continuing some conversations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. And Mr. Bessent, we're toward the very end here. I'll leave that it's very clear that you have acted in your dealing with the vetting of this committee in a very, very straightforward, courteous, and honorable way. When it comes to your qualifications to be the next Secretary of the Treasury, there is no room for debate, and you have shown that today here in the hearing. Your background, your training is tailor-made for this role, and your character and demeanor are self-evident. You have satisfied our due diligence process. In prior Congresses, I've joined with many of my Republican colleagues in voting for well-qualified Treasury Secretary by a Democratic president, even though I didn't agree with all of the positions that they advocated. Your candidacy ought to enjoy similar support, and I'm going to encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join with me in advancing your nomination. I appreciate your taking the time that you have taken to work with us over the past few weeks to get this process to this point. And with that, I would like to remind my colleagues that the deadline for submitting any questions for the record is 5 p.m. today. And without anything else, this hearing stands adjourned.